Hey everyone, gruesome crime caught on camera. Have you guys seen it? Because we haven't.
All right, let's jump into it.
The next time you're out walking around the streets of London, look up. Chances are good you will find a camera somewhere nearby. Because as of publishing this video right now today, London is one of the most surveilled cities in the entire world.
Oh, I
with
didn't know that.
citizens being filmed up to 70 times a day. Now, the reason
Jesus.
for all
Wow.
of these cameras is to deter and more effectively prosecute criminal activity. But the vast majority of the footage these hundreds of thousands of cameras all over London capture every day is just normal people doing
Right.
normal things.
Yeah.
But periodically, these cameras will capture people doing just horrible, illegal things. And today, I'm going to tell you the story behind one of those types of videos. Now,
Oh.
at first glance, the video clip, which we're going to play, will not be that shocking. But trust me, with context, it's horrifying. But
boy.
before we get into
Oh.
that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and
Tell me how to
mysterious
subscribe.
delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, in your will, please give the like button a treasure map that leads to a pot of gold. However, replace the gold with a $6 gift certificate to Blockbuster. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn
So
on all
useless.
notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Damn, that like button's gonna be on a long journey because I'm gonna make that treasure map so messed up.
A multi-step find.
Yeah, I'll give him an expired Blockbuster gift card.
Damn. Brutal.
On the morning of Friday, June 11th, 2021, in a suburb in the northwest of London, a man named David Klein woke up to his early morning alarm. David rolled out of bed, he got dressed, and he very carefully made his way downstairs to start getting ready for work. As David moved around this old brick house he was in, he was very careful not to make much noise because he didn't want to wake up his roommate, a 67-year-old widow named Deborah Chong. Deborah was technically David's landlord, but she didn't charge him any rent. The two had met in church, and when Deborah had learned that David didn't really have a place to live, she had immediately volunteered her house and told David to come live with her for free. David couldn't believe her generosity and immediately took her up
too
on
nice.
the offer. And then after he had moved in, he learned that he was far from the first person who Deborah had allowed to come and live in her house
so
rent-free.
something she
Oh.
did.
Turn out, Deborah, whose late husband had given her a ton of money in his will, felt like it was her responsibility and her duty to use her ample resources to house people that were kind of down on their luck. She said it was
Okay.
her way
like a nice
of
lady.
serving God. Also, David got the impression that Deborah just liked having people living with her in her home. It made her happy.
Okay.
But David would notice a distinct change in Deborah's personality around the time the COVID-19 pandemic started in early 2020. At that time, Deborah, like many other people, was very concerned about this global health crisis and wanted to learn more about what was happening and what could happen in the future. And so the way she did that is she obsessively began going on YouTube
No.
and began consuming COVID-19 related content and political content surrounding COVID-19 and the pandemic and lockdowns. But instead of becoming more educated and well-versed on what was happening in the world, Deborah's constant consumption of COVID-19 related content on
Yikes.
YouTube really just made her feel incredibly stressed out and anxious.
Yeah.
And as David began
Sometimes
to see
too much
firsthand,
information is not
Deborah's
better.
sudden
Yeah.
high levels of anxiety really began wreaking havoc on her life. Years earlier, Deborah was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which is a
Oh,
mental illness that
no.
causes bouts of psychosis, which is like losing touch with reality. Now, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, her symptoms were so mild that she basically led a totally normal life. But once the pandemic started and her YouTube quest for
Oh,
information
shit.
caused
Not
that
a good
spike in
combo.
stress and anxiety, it caused a spike in her symptoms. And so she began suffering from frequent and lengthy hallucinations and delusions. One time, David came home from work, and when he went inside the house, he found Deborah sitting at the kitchen table, diligently writing these handwritten letters to various British public figures. And when David asked her what she was doing, she explained to him that these British public figures were speaking directly to her through the YouTube videos she was watching. And so these handwritten letters were her response letters back to these public figures. In May of 2021, Deborah's hallucinations had gotten so bad that doctors intervened and forcibly injected her with an antipsychotic medication. And while these meds definitely reduced Deborah's symptoms, they also had some pretty negative side effects as well. Namely, they totally curbed her appetite and they made sleeping really challenging. And so pretty quickly,
wouldn't that be a
those
temporary
two side
fix?
effects combined made Deborah feel really weak and tired basically all the time, to the point where she sometimes needed David to literally hold her up by her arm just to walk down the street. Now, David, of course, had no problem helping Deborah with whatever she wanted. I mean, she had done so much for him, but David had work, and so he was only really available to help her in the mornings and in the evenings during the week. And so he had actually spoken to Deborah about hiring a full-time caretaker that could live with her and just take care of her at the level she needed all the time. And Deborah was open to it. She actually called a company that offered that service, and they told her they would get someone out to her, but it would take some time before her caretaker was actually assigned to her. Now, David was really pleased with this development, but he really wished they would speed it up, because again, every time he was away all day at work, he knew Deborah was home by herself, and so he was just so worried something was going to happen to her when he was gone. So after David gathered up all of his things and very quietly made his way from the kitchen to the front door, he paused for a moment and said a silent prayer in his head for Deborah's safety and protection while he was away at work, and then he opened the front door, quietly went outside, shut the door behind him, and headed off to work. A few hours later, David came home from work, he went back inside of the house, and the first thing he did is he called out for Deborah. But Deborah didn't call back, and the house was very quiet, and so David took off his shoes and walked around the first floor, kind of calling out for Deborah as he walked, but again, there was no answer. And so after walking the whole first floor and not finding her, he yelled one more time really loudly, "Hey, Deborah, are you here?" And after hearing nothing, he pulled out his phone and he called Deborah. And as the phone was ringing, he could hear Deborah's phone ringing.
Oh, that's creepy.
And so he thought, okay, maybe Deborah is upstairs, she fell asleep, and her phone's just next to her on the bed. And so with David's phone still calling Deborah's phone, David began walking upstairs. And when he got to the top of the stairs, he just followed the sound of Deborah's ringing phone into her bedroom. And when he went in there, Deborah was not in there. Her phone was though, and so were her glasses. They were both just sitting on the bed. Those were two items that Deborah would bring with her anywhere she went. And so trying not to panic, David called out a few more times for Deborah, but again, there was no answer. And so after quickly searching her bedroom and not finding her, he searched all the other rooms upstairs, but again, she just was not there. She was not in the house. And so David began calling and texting friends from church and other people that knew Deborah to see if anybody had heard from her or knew where she was. But no one did, and the only people who had recently talked to her said she was totally incoherent, talking about spirits and demons and the destruction of mankind. And so, believing Deborah must be suffering from a schizophrenic hallucination somewhere out in the city, David picked up his phone again and he called the police. When the police showed up at the house, David filled them in on what was going on, and the police told him, hey, look, we'll go back and review all of the CCTV camera footage taken from outside of your house. We're bound to see footage of Deborah leaving her house at some point.
If you got all those cameras,
watch where she goes. And so David felt reassured, and the police felt very confident. But when the police went back to the station and began reviewing all
never
of the
left the
security
house.
That's what I'm
footage taken
thinking.
from roughly outside of Deborah's house, there was no footage of her ever leaving the house. There was only footage the day before of Deborah going into the house, but she never left. And so naturally,
she's
the
walking
police
like she's in a
went
trance.
back to Deborah and David's house, and they thoroughly searched that house, believing Deborah had to be in there somewhere. But despite searching everywhere in this house, in every crawl space, in the attic, the basement, every closet, everywhere, she wasn't there. It would take the police nearly a month, but they would eventually figure out where Deborah went. And to say they were surprised at where she went is a massive understatement.
Oh my God, please tell me.
But to understand what happened, we have to go back to the very beginning of Deborah's very strange disappearance story.
Okay.
It all started about 10 months before Deborah actually went missing in August of 2020. That month, Deborah met a 36-year-old woman named Jemma Mitchell at one of her church prayer groups. Like Deborah, Jemma was very religious, and so the two women became fast friends despite being 30 years apart in
Suspicious already.
Deborah would confide in Jemma about her mental health struggles, and Jemma would confide in Deborah about her house/financial troubles. Basically, Jemma, a couple years earlier, had given money to a contractor to fix up her house, but the contractor had taken her money, not done any work, and then run off, basically robbing Jemma.
Jerk.
But Jemma really needed to do these renovations, and so she wound up hiring a second contractor who did begin work, but during this process, Jemma realized she would never be able to recover the money that was stolen from her from the first contractor, and so when she realized she wasn't going to get that money, she knew she would not be able to fully pay the second contractor for his work.
That sucks.
And so when the second contractor found out he was not going to get paid, he stopped work immediately, despite the fact that there was no working heat in Jemma's house, and there was a huge hole in her roof. But Jemma had no way to fix this, and so she and her mom were just living in this house that was just totally freezing all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Deborah had been so moved by Jemma's situation that very quickly after meeting her, she offered £200,000 to Jemma
Damn.
to finish the renovations on her house, under the condition that one room in Jemma's new house would be solely dedicated to Christian ministry. Jemma was overwhelmed with gratitude. She could not believe
excessive,
that Deborah
but
was
okay.
willing to do this for her.
condition?
And so, of course,
Yeah.
she agreed to her terms.
Yeah, just give me
without
one
any
whole room in your
hesitation.
house.
After that, the two women began texting all the time about this renovation project. Deborah would suggest paint colors and different things to do with the inside of the house, and Jemma would text updates about the different contractors she had talked to who could do pieces of the renovation. Deborah was always inviting Jemma over to her house, and she even began referring to Jemma as her sister. And Jemma loved it because Jemma actually had always wanted to be much closer with her own biological sister.
Is Jemma
but
a
they kinda drifted
psychopath?
apart. And so for Jemma,
I think
Deborah really did
I think Deborah
feel
just
like the sister
lived at
she
her
was
house
supposed
for a
to have.
while in that room.
But their relationship was about to change drastically.
Oh, never
In
mind.
May of 2021, so 8 months after the two women met for the first time, and 1 month before Deborah would vanish, Deborah was forcibly injected with that antipsychotic medication in order to combat her paranoid schizophrenia. And right after Deborah got this injection, she began treating Jemma totally differently. She basically stopped communicating altogether with Jemma, and then in the rare times
Oh my
she
God,
would
did she
text
kidnap
Jemma,
her?
it was just to berate her about being a hoarder or being too messy and sloppy. Jemma didn't really know what to make of her friend's new behavior, but she knew, Deborah was going through a really tough time, and so Jemma just kind of took the abuse and didn't say anything. When Jemma did try to talk to Deborah by asking about the renovation project, which was quickly approaching on the horizon, Deborah would tell Jemma not to talk about it, that it was too stressful and just don't bring it up again. And then one day, Deborah just called Jemma out of the blue and said, "I'm not funding the renovation anymore. It's over. You're on your own." Jemma felt totally devastated and pleaded with Deborah to please reconsider. But Deborah was not about to change her mind. And in fact, on this call, she would tell Jemma, hey, you should just sell your house. And in fact, until you sell your house, don't contact me. And then Deborah hung up. Jemma didn't know what to do. She felt like she really could not sell her house because it was kind of like a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations, and so it just felt wrong to sell it. But on the other hand, without help, she would never have enough money to fix the house up. And so she was totally stuck, and she felt like her only option was to go to Deborah and have one more conversation and just really plead her case and see if maybe there was some chance Deborah would change her mind. So, on the morning of June 11th, 2021, so this is the day that Deborah goes missing, Jemma showed up on Deborah's porch and rang her doorbell. She arrived just after David had left for work. A few moments later, Deborah slowly made her way to the door. She opened it up. She saw Jemma out there and asked, what's going on? And Jemma just very politely said, "Would you please let me come in? And can we just talk one more time about the renovation?" And Deborah, who was not very enthused at the idea of having this conversation, said, "You know what? Okay, Come on in. And so Jemma would go inside, and the two women would go sit down, and they'd exchange some pleasantries. And then at some point, when there was a break in the conversation, Jemma brought up the renovation. She had actually written out this whole speech about how incredible Deborah was, and how these renovations, if they went through with them, would mean so much to her, Jemma, and her family. But as Jemma is going through this pitch,
Deborah's
Deborah
like,
just cuts
"Nah."
her off and says, Jemma, I'm sorry, but my decision is final. I am not paying for the renovation. I'm sorry.
Oh my God, I wonder
A little while
why.
later,
Don't make a
both
promise you can't
Jemma
keep,
and
Deborah.
Deborah would leave Deborah's house. And there actually is CCTV footage that shows the pair walking on Deborah's street right outside of her house. However, the reason the police did not flag this footage when they first were scanning all of that footage to figure out where Deborah went is because when you watch the footage of the two women together, it actually only looks like one person. It looks like Jemma.
What?
But Jemma is wheeling a huge suitcase right behind her, and as it would turn out, Deborah was inside of it.
No.
It's assumed that after Deborah was forcibly given that antipsychotic medication for her paranoid schizophrenia, that it really leveled her out. She was suddenly thinking very clearly for the first time in months. And in this clear state of mind, it's believed she realized the 200,000-pound gift she was giving to Jemma, someone she barely knew, was a bad decision. And so she just wanted to back out of it. And so, back inside of Deborah's house, when Deborah and Jemma are sitting there, and Jemma is
They're like
doing
two
her
different
speech
people.
to try to convince Deborah
One
to
that
change
made the
her
decision,
mind, and Deborah
one
is
that
saying,
was
no,
like,
my
nah.
final answer
Well,
is
Jemma
no,
could have
it's
also been very
over.
manipulative.
That's when
Yeah.
Jemma snapped. She grabbed a blunt object, we don't know what it was, and she smashed Deborah right over the skull and fractured her skull, causing Deborah to fall unconscious and slump onto the floor. And then Jemma leapt on top of Deborah's unconscious body. Jemma pulled out a knife and cut Deborah's head off.
What?
Afterward, Jemma cleaned up all the blood in the house and then stuffed Deborah's body and head into that big suitcase. And then after Jemma stole several legal documents and a copy of Deborah's will, she walked out of Deborah's house with Deborah in the suitcase behind her.
what?
Bitch
Jemma
is
would walk
crazy.
with Deborah all the way back to her house, and then she would leave the suitcase with Deborah still inside of it in her backyard. She would just leave it there for 2 weeks, and then after those 2 weeks, Jemma would take the suitcase again, still with Deborah's body inside of it, and transport it 250 miles away to a seaside town where she would dump it. And in that seaside town, some vacationers would discover Deborah's body and call it in to the police. On July 6th, 2021, police would arrest Jemma on suspicion of murder. When they arrested her, they showed up at her house and used a battering ram to smash in her front door. And then when the door finally literally smashed open, Jemma was just standing there waiting for the police as if she knew this was going to happen, and she's just waiting to be taken away. When the police would actually go into Deborah's house and search it, they would find a fake copy of Deborah's will where all of Deborah's estate was handed over to Jemma and Jemma's mother.
God damn.
2022, Jemma was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years. To this day, Jemma insists she did not kill Deborah. So that's going to do
wild.
it. If you got
Holy
something out of this
shit,
episode,
man.
and
So
She cleaned up all the blood. She cut her fucking head off.
grabbed a mop and was like, gotta clean it up.
No, I don't think that seems
I mean, the thing
crazy.
that's crazy when the guy came back,
Yeah,
he looked around the whole house. That there was no evidence
none.
of any of that happening. I think what happened. This is my speculation. Is
Detective
that Jemma,
Eli,
yeah,
yes.
Detective Eli, is that Jemma,
Yeah.
used Deborah's like her mental disorder to
Yeah.
take advantage of her,
100%.
and then after she got the shot, it was like, oh, I don't know where you heard this or whatever, but that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jenna was like, no, I'm getting that money. And then
She snapped?
she snapped because she realized she was not going to get heat in that house.
Yeah. Oh my God, how brutal, dude.
That's crazy.
Cut her head off. That's unnecessary.
I mean, given the circumstances
Unnecessary.
of what happened with Jenna and all the shit that went through and her losing the money and the desperation, I mean, that's so sad that it had to come to that.
Yeah, poor Deborah, man.
Poor Deborah. I mean, yeah, poor Deborah. She doesn't have a head now.
I know.
All right, well.
On that note.
On that note, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye.